Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the museum, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to... Oh, thank you. I'm very, very excited to welcome you to today's program that we're calling Fire Drill Fridays with Jane Fonda, Janet Valenzuela, and Laura Flanders. Before we get started, I want to remind you to please silence your cell phones, and please note that taking photos and video isn't allowed during the program. I also want to quickly mention that on Wednesday, we're having a really interesting program about voter suppression and then all the other ways that voting can go wrong, sideways, etc. I think we've had a few extreme examples of that recently. So we'll be delving really deep into that issue of voting on Wednesday, so come join us for that. And you're also welcome to join us on Super Tuesday. We're going to have a viewing party as the results come in from Super Tuesday. We'll have a cash bar and some sort of participatory activities, so feel free to come for that. You can also come and vote at the Hammer. We are a voting center, so we'll be open on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. No, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Tuesday is Super Tuesday. And I hope everyone is planning to vote. Sorry, I can't hear. Today's program addresses direct action that individuals can take to battle one of the most pressing issues of our time, climate change. As you'll soon hear, Fire Drill Fridays was inspired in part by the young Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, and also by Naomi Klein's latest book, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal, in which Klein builds a compelling case for using the Green New Deal as an intersectional approach to tackling climate change, while also reinventing healthcare, transportation, and infrastructure, and creating meaningful jobs with livable wages and treating all human beings with dignity and compassion. She's amazing. I mentioned the book and the talk, which you will hear about more, but you can also view Naomi Klein's talk that she did about that book here at the Hammer in October, and the video of that talk is available on our webpage. So now I'm just going to give the very briefest of introductions to our superstar panelists, and then I'll let them get to it. Jane Fonda is a two-time Academy Award-winning actress, activist, and global icon, and author, sorry, I just skipped one, and many other things. Her career has spanned over 50 years, accumulating a body of film work that includes over 45 films and crucial work on behalf of political causes, including women's rights, Native American rights, and the environment. Her life and activism is chronicled in the HBO documentary Jane Fonda in 5 Acts, which premiered at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival. Jane celebrated her 80th birthday by raising $1 million for each of her nonprofits, the Georgia Campaign for Adolescent Power and Potential, and the Women's Media Center. For the past 4 months, she's led the weekly Fire Drill Friday protests at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. to support the growing movement trying to force the U.S. government to take meaningful action on climate change. Janet Valenzuela is an eco-activist from Huntington Park in Southeast LA. She's a community organizer with the nonprofit group East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice, and is dedicated to challenging ongoing structures of colonialism that work toward rationalizing the use of destructive elements in her community and other similarly affected places and peoples. East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice formed in response to the devastating lead contamination in East and Southeast LA, where the Exide battery plant had violated environmental regulations for more than 30 years, releasing lead, arsenic, and other toxins into the air through their smelting process. Her organization successfully pressured regulators to shut the plant down in 2015. Our moderator today is journalist Laura Flanders. On her eponymous, nationally syndicated radio and television show, she interviews forward-thinking people about the key questions of our time. She's also a contributing writer to The Nation magazine and the author of 6 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Bushwomen, Tale of a Cynical Species. She's the recipient of a 2019 Izzy Award for Excellence in Independent Journalism, the Pat Mitchell Lifetime Achievement Award for Advancing Women and Girls' Visibility in the Media, and a 2020 Lannan Cultural Freedom Fellowship for her reporting and advocacy for public media. Now please join me in welcoming Jane Fonda, Janet Valenzuela, and Laura Flanders.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. There are times and there are places where everything comes together, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We just saw a month where temperatures in Antarctica rose to 65 degrees for the first time ever as our president was being acquitted of his impeachment. We have seen action on climate of many kinds. We're going to talk about the extraordinary actions that Jane has mobilized over the last many months. But let me start by giving you an idea of what comes together in the place that Janet represents. It's not even an hour south from here. A lot of things come together at the East Yard community. You have 40 to 60,000 trucks, most of them belching diesel, powering up the highway from the port to take 40% of all the products that are distributed in the US to their destinations. In the other direction, you have oil coming from LA area drilling to the refineries north of the harbor. And in that place, people live. And people live who have fought back and won fights that everybody told them were impossible. So we're going to hear more about what the communities do. Things came together for Jane in a time type of way last fall, where, as the title of her new book reads, she was asking herself, what can I do? And she moved from despair to action. October 11th saw the first Fire Drill Friday. They have grown in power and impact. They have brought back a practice of civil disobedience to our capital. And while a lot of people say that nothing gets done in Washington, they did a lot. So let's start with having you, Jane, talk a bit about that despair that you were feeling before you vaulted into action.
Thanks, Laura. Well, it had been going on for a while. It's a thing now. I mean, psychologists call it climate despair, extinction despair, existential angst. You know, and it's especially when you're famous, there's a great responsibility, I think. I had stopped using single-use plastics. I drive an electric car. I did all those things that you're supposed to do to reduce your carbon footprint. But in my heart of hearts, I knew that's a great place to start, but it's just a starting place. That even if we all did that, it wouldn't be enough to get us where we need to go. And I didn't know what to do. And then I read on Labor Day weekend Naomi Klein's book, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal. And as Naomi always changes my life with her books, but this time I knew within 40 pages that I needed to move to DC. I needed to put my body on the line. It was partly the way she wrote about Greta Thunberg and the way she described Greta reacts to science. And it's partly because she's on the spectrum. When she finds out something about something she cares about, and she's a self-described science nerd, there's a laser focus. You know, she doesn't alter her feelings about it in order to be more popular or to fit in or something. She sees it, and for her, she went into trauma because she said, if this is true, what the science is saying, people wouldn't just be going about life as usual. And so she stopped speaking and eating and got seriously sick. And when I read that, it just hit me. You know, I knew the science. I'd read it. It was hovering out there someplace, but I hadn't internalized it and metabolized it. And with that book and with reading about Greta, I took the science into me and realized I have to do something. And I just want to give you for example, well, one thing is that there aren't two sides to the story. There's only one story. Now, the scientists are all in agreement. They all say the same thing. We have now 10 years maximum to cut our fossil fuel emissions in half and not drill or frack any new fossil fuels right now in order to reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, just think what that means, cutting our fossil fuel emissions in half. We have an economy that's built on fossil fuel. So this is Herculean, what the science is telling us to do. Humankind has never done this before. And 11,000 of them said the situation is drastic. They said only rapid transformational action can stave off global climate disasters. These are scientists. These are nerds. These are, forgive me if any of you are scientists, but you try to stay neutral under the radar. You don't come out and... Now scientists are like breaking down their lab doors with their white jackets and saying, wake up, people, this is it. We are the last generation that can save the future for our kids. And so I just knew then and there, I don't know if it's going to work or anything, but I have to put my body on the line. So I called Annie Leonard, who runs Greenpeace USA, and I said, I want to move to DC and camp out in front of the White House for a year. And she said, well, that's great. But it's illegal. You can't do that. So we worked out a compromise every Friday, like the students, and we met with the students, and they agreed to welcome us, into their Fridays. Ted Sarandos wouldn't give us a year off from Grace and Frankie, but so I got 4 months, and the minute I got there, the depression lifted. Just like with Greta, the minute she started sitting in front of the Swedish Parliament, her mutism, her depression lifted. She started eating again. She started smiling again. I highly recommend activism for an antidote to depression.
Janet, have you ever felt depressed where you are?
No, just sick. Yeah, sick.
Talk about it.
It's an honor to be here. I would first like to start off by recognizing that we're on occupied land. We're on Tongva land. And just saying that I'm really happy to be here, for my mom to be here, and my dad, who couldn't be here today because he was abducted by ICE, and he's in the Adelanto detention center right now. Yeah, what we feel is sick and tired, right? And Laura talked a little bit about the infrastructure that's in our community. And a lot of the work we do is around the goods movement, right? How goods move. And you're talking about the LA ports and the Long Beach ports combined supply 40% of American goods. In order for those goods, right, to get to your homes, right, Amazon's, the Prime members, oftentimes don't get to see the infrastructures that we live with, that we live on. And so you're talking about the rail yards, the 710 freeways, 40 to 60,000 trucks, right? And you have the diesel, you have the oil refineries, and yes, we have scientists to tell us that these are carcinogenic, that they do cause cancer, but then we have agencies, right? People that we put in those positions to regulate the industries that are telling us we can poison you a little bit longer, right? And how that's looking like right now with the fossil fuel industry is this introduction around natural gas as a solution, right? Or just transition, right? That we need just transition infrastructure. But in my community, we don't have the luxury to wait for that infrastructure to come into our communities, right? We have people that have cancers on the block. We have people that have high asthma on the block, right? And so we need zero emissions infrastructure because we know that these freeways are not going anywhere, right? These ports are not gonna go anywhere. But at least we can move for the trucks to be zero emissions, right? For them to be fully electric, and that we use renewable energy as a sustainable way for our communities to just have the right to breathe clean air.
Janet, I don't want to pass so quickly over your father's situation and just share, I think, everyone's feeling of this is terrible and we want to hear more. And I imagine that you have done some thinking about how our migration and border policy relates to our apparent kind of no border policy when it comes to extraction and fossil fuel development. So I don't know how you piece those pieces together in your head, but I'd love to hear.
I think one thing that I'll share is that East Shore Communities is a communal space, right? It's about family. And part of our work is grassroots. And so it's about thinking of environmental justice or environmental issues as intersectional, right? That we don't just, advocate for clean air or we advocate for parks in our community if then through housing or gentrification we are then displaced, right? And we don't get to enjoy the zero emissions infrastructure that we've been fighting for so long. And I think it has a lot to do with how do we frame the climate justice issue where immigrant communities can be a part of it, and at the same time we're fighting for both in terms of like we want people to migrate, we want people to feel safe in this country, we want people to know that they won't be forced to be separated by their family. But when they do move to this country, they're often living by one of the most toxic industries or some of the busiest highways, right? And so that's where nonprofit organizations or grassroots work addresses some of those needs and those gaps.
Did you want to say anything on that, Jane? How do you understand environmental justice and how it might be different? You've been an environmentalist in some ways for many years. You were married to a very powerful conservationist and preservationist in Ted Turner.
Two of them.
Yes, there you go. You want to talk about the understanding that you have of environmental justice and the degree to which it's related, different, similar?
Well, the second husband that was an environmentalist was a really rich white guy, a great guy. His name was Ted Turner. And, for him, the environment is the wilderness. It's wildlife. It's making sure there are corridors for migrating wildlife. And, great, he's brought back almost extinct, that kind of conservationist.
Wolves.
Huh?
Wolves.
Yeah, wolves and black-footed ferrets. And, when he goes to heaven, there's going to be a lot of critters up there applauding when he comes. But he doesn't realize, like a lot of white guys that started a lot of these great environmental organizations, that the things that are destroying the environment that us rich white people associate with begin at the place where the drill rapes the ground and the fracking puts all the chemicals into the ground. And the refineries and the places where they're exported. That's where it all begins. And those are deliberately put into low-income communities, communities of color, indigenous lands, and people are suffering right now. And we can't solve the climate crisis and the environmental crisis if we don't address the issue of environmental justice where it begins. So all of these large environmental organizations have to expand their hearts and their empathy and their understanding of what environments are. And that's the value of a Green New Deal, because it says we can't solve the problems unless we address this issue of environmental justice. We can't leave people behind. It's never worked. It's never worked.
You took on a struggle that was supposed to be impossible when you all shut down this Exide battery recycling plant. Do you want to talk about how you did it so maybe we can see how we can intersect with the work of grassroots organizations like yours?
Yeah, we stay shutting it down. Exide, so for those of you in the room that are not familiar with Exide, it's a lead battery recycling plant out of the city of Vernon.
So that means your car batteries, right?
Yeah, so when we, take our car to the mechanic and they let us know that they're going to be recycled, we think that was the best environmentalist thing we could have done, right? But yet, those batteries travel to our communities where they're then put in recycling plants. And what Exide was doing, that it was melting down the lead, and then it was spewing it, it was burning it through air smelters. And I was doing that for over 30 years, right? Because agencies are incompetent, they were being negligent, and hearing us around, drawing these examples of whether we had people working at the facility and we know that they weren't using protective gear, or whether people would see how they would transport their product as an issue. It later took, a lot of community power. It took a lot of working with the agencies.
A lot of mothers, you told me.
The Mothers of East LA, who were co-founded by our director's grandmother in the 80s. Who then, at that time, early on, got to visit the facility, and they were given protective gear, right? And when they walked in, they saw that the workers didn't have that gear, and so that's when they were able to draw that was an issue. But I think the key point to take away is that in our communities, these things take generations to shut down. This takes a lot of community power, and it takes people really talking to other people about this issue and applying that pressure to our agencies, who in some way find ways to be in favor for the industry and not in favor of community. And I guess they forget who they're there to serve, right? Yeah.
So what's your attitude to the kind of recycle, reuse, finding ways to transition to cleaner fuels answer to our problems?
And I will quickly add to the last thing that I said before I get into that question, that you have tons of lead, right, that made its way to communities, and it was so much lead that you have you have residential homes where their soil was contaminated, right? So tonight there will be families sleeping in their home where the federal agencies classify that soil toxic waste. And then you ask, well, who's paying for that cleanup, right? Who's paying for those 10,000 residential homes that have to be cleaned up? And it's the state, right? Our money, taxpayer monies are paying it, not Exide. And know that Exide is not just in the city of Vernon. There's other Exides, right, in the United States, and there's a lot of Exides in the world. And so when we look at policy, or when we look at, what are our attitudes around the environment, I mean, I would ask for the folks that, live in places like Santa Monica, right? Do you have a waste facility there? Right? Do you have a recycling plant there, right? Oftentimes your trash comes to our communities and they get burned through incinerators, right? And so where's the equity in that, let alone the equality in that? And so I think as environmentalists, we really need to challenge what's our relationship to the infrastructure and how we can support communities that live near those infrastructures to push policy that'll shut them down. And to ensure that these facilities don't just open up in another community like ours.
So that does take us to that question of, will renewables save us, which is something we're told a lot. Do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah.
Yes, go for it, Jane.
Yeah. Our demands, the Fire Drill Friday demands, were support the Green New Deal, no new fossil fuel extraction, and phase out existing fossil fuel with a just transition. It seemed like a no-brainer. But what I found out was this was unusual. For example, the Green New Deal doesn't mention fossil fuel. And a lot of the senators that support the Green New Deal and are good environmentalists, they never talk about fossil fuels, because that is the hard part of it. And yet that is the core of it. We can have all the windmills and all the solar panels and electric cars and everything. And if they keep drilling and fracking, we're going to go down the tube. It's not going to work. We have to stop them, keep it in the ground. And then what they're already pulling up has to be gradually phased out in a way that involves communities and workers and unions to make sure that those workers have very good jobs and that they're not left behind. But we can't just see Jerry Brown, interesting, we all thought of him as the great environmentalist. And he was great on the windmills and the solar panels all the way back in the 70s. He helped the second husband, who was an environmentalist, Tom Hayden. Jody Evans is here, and she knew him well. big supporter. He helped us get a windmill. He helped us get solar panels, but he never took on the oil industry. So the pressure now has to be put on Gavin Newsom, who gets it. Gavin gets it. He understands. It's just really scary. It's very hard. And we have to really pressure him. Not alienating him. We don't want to make him, anyway, you know what I'm saying. We just have to really pressure him to stand up and just say no more. And in California specifically, shut down all wells, including orphaned wells and idled wells that are within 2,500 feet of houses and schools and hospitals and playgrounds. That would take a lot of oil and fossil fuels off of California's budget if we did that. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? You can't have this stuff close to communities. It causes a lot of problems. People are dying. But nobody has stood up and said so. And then they said, well, we're going to lose a lot of jobs. But you know where there's a lot of jobs? In the cleaning up. It's called the remediation of these wells and these fracking pits. Put people to work cleaning it up. We have to force Newsom to do it. Now. So it's got to be both, think of it as scissors. Scissors require two blades, right? Okay. In the climate crisis, one blade is the renewables, the green energy future, but the other blade is no fossil fuels. We got to have both at once.
You have one of the biggest I think the biggest urban refinery in the country right here in the greater Los Angeles area, right? Would that be a target for Fire Drill Friday?
We're doing it. March 6th. We're going to Wilmington. You're coming, Janet, right?
I'll be there.
Yeah. We're gonna have our second California Fire Drill Friday in Wilmington. And if you're interested in joining, or we're gonna be like on May 1st, we'll be in Bakersfield. That's a huge oil drilling field. Text Jane to 877-877. And you can tell us, I want to go to Wilmington, or I want to start a Fire Drill Friday. 12,000 people have signed up. We're going to be rolling this out nationally, so join us.
We'll
Jane,
repeat that
877-877. Huh? March, it's the first Friday of every month, but the Wilmington is March 6th, and I'm going to rent a bus to take people down, or 2 buses, or 3 buses.
You're going to talk more about Fire Drill Fridays in just a second, but I do want Janet to talk a little bit about the cleanup that isn't happening right now in Exide, and whether you have managed to make sure that local people get good paying jobs in that process.
Yeah. So the stage of the cleanup right now for Exide is that we were able to push for the agency to have local hire for the cleanup. And so the strategy in that is that if local people that live in the community see the some of the cleanup where it's things are not happening right, things are not happening how they're supposed to, they can rely on us to share that information, and it has happened, right? We know that it's happening. And we have seen that in the cleanup, they're not doing it block by block. They're doing it house by house. And so, for example, if Jane's house gets cleaned up, the way that they do it is they pick up all the soil from her front or backyard. So that creates dust, right? And then it travels to my home. But then they'll do my home about 2 months later, and they'll do the same thing, and then dust will travel on to Jane's home, right? And so there's a lot of flaws, significant flaws in how these cleanups are happening. But another concern of mine is that the standard that was given for the cleanup was 80 parts per million. So not 0 parts per million, right? 80 parts per million. The state has ignored an agriculture standard, which is a 5.6 parts per million. So the state has ignored that communities living near the Exide are growing citruses, are growing apples. And Laura got to see some of the gardens that we have, and that people depend on these to access local organic produce, right? That depend on this as a cultural practice in their family and their community. And what's also important is that in our communities, you take Commerce, for example, where you have 13,000 residents. And among this community, you have so much industry, so much wealth, and you don't have a grocery store. And so people have to drive out of their community to access one. And you're talking about LA County, where it's a big hub for food trade. In LA County, you have 17 million tons of food that arrive to the county, and 22 million tons that leave LA County, right? And second to that is Fresno, and third to that is Stanislaus. And yet, we see the warehouses, we see the Whole Foods, we see the Ralphs, right? The warehouses in their community. We get the diesel from their trucks, right? But we don't get first pick of their produce. And that's an issue. And that is a systemic issue. It's a food injustice. And it's the way that we address this issue is through our La Cosecha Colectiva, which is our decentralized gardening program. And members get to have edible, medicinal, and native gardens. And then through the monthly meetings, they exchange that within each other, and that's a tool of resistance. And you would think, as you're driving through the neighborhood, one, I hope nobody lives here. Two, I don't think you can grow here, but you'll see that people are growing things. And Mary McAveen, who's here, she's part of Grow Good, and that's one of the largest urban farms we have in LA, and it's getting done, right? And it's gonna get done.
If you go to, I think if you go to my YouTube channel right now, lauraflanders.org YouTube channel, you can see a very short video we made on Friday together that shows you some of the neighborhood and some of the growing.
Yeah, I don't look like how I look now in that video, but...
You look very good all the time.
Thank you.
I don't look like I look now either. For maybe our audience that are not in California, it would be helpful, people like me, to realign ourselves, because we think of California as the great green liberal bastion that's leading the nation right now on lots of good things and against lots of bad things. Why California? Why does California need a Fire Drill Friday, Jane?
Well, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. What happens here affects not just the rest of the United States, but the rest of the world. That's why Trump attacks us so much. You know, if California sets good emission standards on cars, the manufacturers in the middle of the country are going to be forced to make cars meeting those emission standards because we are such a big market. We're important. And we are, next to Texas, the largest fossil fuel producing state in the United States. And so if we are going to save ourselves from total catastrophe in the 10 years that the science gives us, California is the place where we have to stop fossil fuels. And oil has run California forever. I mean, Los Angeles, where we are right now, Tongva people lived on top of oil. This is a huge reservoir of oil under the ground of Los Angeles. It's enormous, and it's also one of the worst kinds of oil. It's worse or as bad as the Alberta tar sands oil. It's difficult to get to, it's energy intensive to get to, and it's very environmentally destructive. So California, you know, I was very depressed at the idea of having to leave DC and come back to California, even though I love working with Lily Tomlin. But then I did a Skype meeting with a lot of the leaders in California that are fighting big oil and fossil fuel in California, and I said, this strategically, we are in the state that we need to be in. And we have to now move away from just the solar panels and the windmills into the really hard stuff. And it's going to be a huge fight to get this to stop. It's going to take everything we have. We have to build an army. And that's part of what Fire Drill Friday is going to do, joining with people who've been doing this in California for a long, long time, and giving their lives to it, in fact.
An army, a swarm, a posse,
Army,
all right.
There's armies, and then there's armies.
People's type army. Janet, how do we connect the local, the regional, and the national? Because national groups paying attention to what's happening where you are is great, but not if they don't come and ask you what they need to focus on first, or not if they don't say you have a place at the table first, right? So how do you do both? Because you're busy. How do you have local engagement that has regional and national impact?
We stay busy. We stay overworked. We stay underpaid. No, and honestly, it's that we have to build solidarity first and foremost with Indigenous people, because we see that where these pipelines are being built is to extract the oil that is then going to be sent to Long Beach. Well, it'll then be refined, right? And then we're gonna get the politicians and the people in the agencies that are telling us that natural gas is the best solution, right, to the climate change crisis and to our health, right? But it's a transition, right? It's still that transition. It's still part of the petro industry. And so we should look at, LADWP, for example. We should look at Edison.
What's
and seeing
LEDWP for those of us who don't know?
It's the Department of Water and Power.
Got it.
And see what are their contracts, right? Is it still tied to the fossil fuel industry? Is it still trying to push natural gas? Because oftentimes we'll see that those infrastructures for the natural gas are going to be built in our communities or are going to be built in San Bernardino County. And let's see if there's anything else I can add. But yes, along with the fossil fuels, it's also the natural gas, right? That it's still frack gas is what I'm trying to say. And what people can do is we need to show up in numbers to these agencies, right? We need to show up with our connections and our resources around who do we don't need industry in these boards anymore. We don't need industry making the decisions around air quality. We don't need people that are in these positions of power that are pushing for the chemical industry, right, around pesticides. And it's very important to, as local, to have networks in the region that'll then work with the national, because we know that it's gonna come back to our communities.
Now, it might be that somebody in this very room is on a board or attends a meeting or is part of a city council or community council group that doesn't have you at the table yet.
Yeah, check us out. East Share Communities for Environmental Justice .org. We have an Instagram. We have a Twitter. No, honestly, it comes down to when we have events, right? When we're supporting the Green New Deal and they're having panelists, are Indigenous people at the table? Are Indigenous people being paid to speak and paid to participate, right? Because that's how we sustain those individuals who are the most vulnerable to climate change. And that's how we sustain their families, right? That's how we sustain their communities. And so I think it's really important that people start connecting to the local politics and seeing who's in power and what contracts and where the money's coming from.
Yeah. Can I just add one
please.
thing? Because voting is coming around now. The importance of down ballot, city councils. I'm only beginning to understand the potential power that the LA City Council has. The LA City Council could mandate a real Green New Deal, not a wishy-washy spaghetti spine Green New Deal, but a real one. And yet it's mostly made up of industry people and developers. So we have to pay attention to who we vote for on the city councils. And just because we don't know everybody's names, call people who might know who to vote for. We all have different people that we call for it. I call Andy Spahn, and I say, okay, tell me, who are these people? I don't know any of their names. Who should I vote for? And I get the names that are progressive. Boards of supervisors, and sometimes, of course, we don't choose who's on these various agencies. They're named by mayors and things like that. So we have to be prepared to pressure the mayors to appoint people who really represent the community and not just the big oil and the bad guys.
Did you want to add something? No. Well, having talked about voting, I want to ask you, why civil disobedience, Jane?
Well, you don't start with civil disobedience, but we've pleaded and begged and petitioned and marched and rallied and written for 40 years, and they haven't listened. And so we have to step it up. And civil disobedience is, for example, what the young African-American students in Mississippi did when they sat down at the lunch counter that was segregated. There was a law, a bad law, and so they sat and they called attention. Us white folk up north, we wouldn't have really known what was going on. We wouldn't have known the depth of the brutality and the violence that was being meted out against black people in the South had it not been for those students and for Martin Luther King. Nonviolent civil disobedience. Gandhi changed the history of India through nonviolent civil disobedience. And one of the things that I've noticed, because, you know, when we first went to D.C., Jody knows, we didn't know if it was going to work. We had no idea if it would gain traction. You know, just some aging celebrity comes bopping into D.C. and decides she's going to do this thing on Friday. But within a few weeks, people were coming from all over the country, from Oregon, from Washington, from Wisconsin, from Colorado, who had never in their life engaged in civil disobedience and risked arrest. You know, the first Friday, there were 16 of us that got arrested, and the last one, there was over 300. And one of the things that I know, well, they were mostly women. Very interesting. We could do a whole show on that. There are reasons. And the thing that I noticed, people changed. You know, my dear friend who's in Grace and Frankie, Sam Waterston, I love him so much, but he is as moderate as you can get. He had never spoken at a rally. He had never risked arrest in his life. And he did this because I asked him to. And when he came out of the detention, I could see that something was different. 2 weeks later, I get a photograph of him handcuffed on the playing field at the Yale-Harvard game. He'd gone and gotten arrested again with the students protesting their university's investments in fossil fuel. And then he came back again to Fire Drill Fridays with his sister and wife and did it again. Ted Danson, same thing. He came out of detention and he said, I'm different. I feel different. And I heard that from so many, I'm just mentioning the celebrities, but from so many people. We have so little opportunity right now to align our bodies with our values. And it's like you lose control. That's right, you're handcuffed and you're out of control, and yet you know that what you're doing is the right thing. And it changes you. And I think it has to become the new norm. Whoever gets elected, whoever it is, if it's the best possible person we can think of or the worst.
Getting arrested with Jane is clearly a gateway drug to action.
We have to be prepared to shut the government down if necessary. We have to be prepared. I mean, the scientists said transformational action. That's the only thing that can stave off climate disaster. Transformational action. I'm not kidding, folks. I mean, we're facing a crisis of climate and a crisis of democracy. We're not facing it. We're in the middle of it. We're right here in the middle of it. And we have to be prepared to put our bodies on the line. Okay? And if you can't do that, babysit for the people who are putting their bodies on the line, or bring food or medical care to the people that are putting their bodies on the line. Now's the time. This is it.
So that brings us to some of the, go for it. That brings us to the race and gender and class part of all of this, because not all of our bodies are treated the same, particularly by our armed forces. It's not so easy for undocumented people to get arrested. Can you see an alliance that's helpful, or how do you think about civil disobedience in the context of the communities that you work, who don't come and leave, they live there? Or is it a useful tactic?
It's very useful, and I think how Jane started off with, it's definitely not where we want to start. Right? Oftentimes when we notice in our communities that something's not right, and you just know, right, something's not right. And I think that's the spirit of East Yard. It's that in the early, 2000s and the early 1900s, right, people, early 1990s, sorry, there's, where those rail yards are, that didn't used to be there. It was Japanese farms and gardens. Japanese people were living there. And then you had World War II happen, and Japanese families were then displaced from their communities, displaced from their homes, and were put into internment camps. And then that led to the gardens and the farms went away. And then NAFTA came in. And then through the North American Trade Agreement, you had to build infrastructure, right, to push for that supply and demand. And when that infrastructure came into the community, people started to feel different, right? I think for a lot of young people in our communities, we think that asthma is genetics, like genetically passed on, right? A lot of people have always felt that something wasn't right, but it's through our organization, it's through our grassroots work that people that can then pinpoint the issues, the problems, and can bring solutions that are community driven. And it's amazing to see those moments, right? Those aha moments. And we have one of our youth organizers that's here in the crowd, and just the work that comes from youth that have known that having cancer is just becoming more normal. And asthma has been something that's normal. And it's because throughout these years, we've seen that this infrastructure in our community, seeing trucks in our community, is normalized, right? And so when we're able to point out, when we're able to work together and show that these are acts of violence, right? That this is intentional harm, this is systemic oppression, that we can come to those solutions when it's frontline communities leading the way. And for the folks that are down with the civil disobedience, for the folks that are down to put their bodies on the line, like props to you, but I'm already putting my lungs on the line, right? Since I was little, our lungs are the first to filter that air. Right? And so when we see the smog in LA, but when we get the rain and it washes away, right, that's not the case for a lot of us, right? The pollution does not go away. And so I think there's opportunities for both, but know that, communities that are there, that are living through it, we're tired. We're tired of going through it. We're tired of going to the doctors, and we're also really tired of seeing that agencies, for example, pass policy around air quality and then fund programs that bring air monitors into our communities. We already know what's in the air. We don't need to monitor it, right? We need to fix it, and we need to hold those accountable, and that's industry and that's politicians that are quick to take money and put profit before our bodies.
The World Health Organization says that every day, 93% of the world's children under 15 breathe air so polluted it endangers their health and development. 93% of all children under 15 in the world.
So on my program, the Laura Flanders Show, we try to lift up positive models of shifting power in the worlds of arts, politics, and economics. And one of the projects that we've been following, and you can feel me shifting to what do we do and what are some of the alternatives that we can be fighting for, as well as the things we want to stop. One of the projects we've been following is an amazing project in Brooklyn, where an 80,000 square foot Brooklyn Army terminal is being covered with solar panels in collaboration with Co-op Power NYC. It'll be a cooperative, and Uprose, which is an extraordinary grassroots environmental justice organization led by a woman called Elizabeth Yam-Pierre. And working together, they secured the contract from the city, amazing, to create a power center right there, a center of power, solar power, that will be community owned, which is both shifting power, and building power in the way that the Green New Deal imagines. What do you imagine, Janet and Jane, as a next step for this work? Yes, we have to stop the bad, but how do we have a new model for power and agribusiness while we're about it, so all this stuff isn't shipping from here to there when people, let's remember, are not allowed to move?
There's so many ways to answer that, honestly. And I think in our work, it's definitely, thinking and acting local, but thinking global. And so I go back to La Cosecha Colectiva, right? And so when people ask us, well, do you just want a grocery store in your community? We actually denied a grocery store to come into our community. So in 2015, 2005, Walmart wanted to build in our communities, and it would come with the distribution center, which means that there would be more trucks on our freeways and streets. And people were having that conversation around, yes, we want a Walmart. It means that we have access to better products. We have access to better produce, right? But then you had on the community members that were just like, but why would it come to this cost, right? Why does it come at the cost of putting more diesel trucks in our communities or not having the best jobs? So in a way, it was anti-capitalist of our members to force a Walmart out of our community, because we know that the global market is not the answer. And we know that we must find local ways, right, to build infrastructure that is for us and by us. And in that way, our community members said, well, if we want access to local organic produce, then why not just do it ourselves? And we're learning how to do it, right? We started building those gardens, and then we come to find out that there is a lead battery recycling plant that's been spewing lead and arsenic into the soil, into our bodies. And then we had to revamp the whole thing and do the raised beds, right? And so it's hard when these attacks are constant in our community, and then you shut one down, and then there's another one that you want to shut down, right? And it's communities that are then using radical imagination and pinpointing what are those threats, right? And so when it comes to the environment, we also think of jobs. We also think of education. We think of health, and we think of the ways that how we can strategically plan our communities while at the same time being like on the defense, right, of everything that we see that keeps popping up in our community. And I think the way that we're coming to do it is through this model of sustainability. But the way that I would like to frame sustainability is a way where communities are autonomous, sovereign and free of destructive elements in their community, but also thinking about in a racial capitalist society, how poor working class communities want us to think of justice in their own terms, or want us to think of liberation in their own terms. And so
might that be community-owned power in East Yards?
Definitely, and it's about community putting those investments in the community and having a right to own them as well, right? Because you have good projects coming into the community, but at the same time, you have gentrification happening in the community. And so while at the same time we want parks, right? We have community, sometimes our representatives telling us, why don't you want these parks in your community? Don't you want these solar farms? It's like, yes, we do, but first we need renter protections, right? We need rent control policy so that people can stay and enjoy the communities that they want to build for themselves.
And I'd like to take it to Germany. Germany's, a large part of the German economy was based on coal mining, coal-powered infrastructure. The German government decided they were going to commit themselves to doing away with coal power. And they convened the unions, the coal companies, the workers, and the communities. And it wasn't easy, but they worked out a way to do it. It's called a just transition, where a coal miner would be in the process of, he'd be working in the coal mines and he'd be training for another job. And if it was a job where the pay would be lower, he would get a lump sum to make up the difference. If he was too old to be trained for a new job, he would be given a pension. And the others would be trained and paid while they were being trained. And so when they were taken out of the coal mines, they were put directly into another unionized job. And over a period of time, over 20,000 coal workers in Germany started working in other sectors, not in coal. And it was, but they had everyone at the table. This is what is critical. Not after the fact, but in order to make it happen smoothly. Now, I met recently with Governor Newsom, and he was talking about the difficulty that he has in closing down the orphaned and idling oil wells in California. And he said, you know, I just closed down private prisons in the San Joaquin Valley, and that's great. It's great that he did that. But everybody's screaming at him because that means a lot of jobs. And I wanted to say, but it was kind of off target right then, why didn't you sit down with the unions and the representatives of the workers, and their cooks and their cleaners and there's guards and there's so many different sectors that work in private prisons, and work it out so that they weren't laid off, they were moved to something else. There's a lot of jobs that need to be done, and but that didn't happen. But that can we said to him, okay, so you're worried about closing down the drilling, especially the ones that are hardly bringing up any oil. And the ones that are close to communities. But put those people to work in remediating the wells, because a lot of these companies, they go bankrupt and they leave us to pay the bills. You know, we get stuck with the cleanup job. Make them do it and get their same workers to do the work. And it was like, it was a new idea. I mean, it's hard to believe that it really was a new idea. But we're doing a study now to determine exactly how many jobs would be provided by remediating the old wells. So in other words, this is what the Green New Deal is. And we can begin to transition off of fossil fuel if we get everybody at the table and figure it out. But the oil companies, they are so smart. Now, in the San Joaquin Valley, they've already got the firefighters, you know, all the first responders on their side. Oh my God, jobs. But I use the example of Germany to show that it doesn't have to mean a big loss of jobs if you plan in advance. And, you know, if a worker had a choice between doing a job for the same amount of money and good pensions and good benefits and not having to be poisoned with all those chemicals that they're working with, or staying in their toxic jobs, of course they'd rather work somewhere else. So tell them what else could be and train them for it. That's the way to go, and that's how to shift power.
You're nodding, Janet.
Yeah.
What's been your relationship with trade unions?
You know, a lot of trade unions don't really favor environmental organizations, but in the case of Exide, we were very intentional around making sure that workers were not displaced of jobs or were out of jobs. And I think people in our community, for the most part, want good jobs. And if it means good jobs, it means that not only does it pay well, but it also has access to health benefits, insurance, and you're not poisoned at the end of the day. And it's also not contributing to the poison in your community as well. But sometimes through, you know, politics has a creative way of just messing things up for everyone. And in the same way is the bureaucracy of everything. And that even though we advocate for it to be done right, it sometimes doesn't go in the favor of those that are the most vulnerable in those transitions, and whether it's workers or community members. But in the example of the cleanup, we advocated that they be locally hired, right? And so now those are union jobs in our community. Now those are good paying jobs in our community. And it's hiring people that understand the impacts of this cleanup, that understand why it's important to remediate and this problem. And that they have a network that they can spot if something's not going right. So yes, we want to transition, but we want those people to be from the community, right? Because they're most likely to speak up when they see that something isn't done right, or if agencies are looking to end contracts to lay people off, and that's where you build community power, and making sure that people are most likely to what's the word that I'm looking for? To blow the whistle if they see that something isn't happening right.
Whistleblower. Yeah, we've become quite familiar with that word.
I got a couple more questions, and then we're going to be taking questions from the audience. So get ready to pepper the group here with questions. One is a case in point. with respect to development without displacement. And that's the LA River, which I saw when I was riding around in the South LA, East LA area where we were on Friday. And the river looks like it could do with a little help.
A lot of help.
So, and you said, oh, I know one of the people involved.
Frank Gehry.
The architect.
One of the people involved. So how can this interesting little alliance help to make sure that you both end up with a beautiful river and everybody ends up with a nice river, but you actually get to still be there, and if there's kayaking at one end of the river, they could perhaps be kayaking at your end of the river too. What would that look like?
Yeah, and just to give people a visual, right? We think of a river to have vegetation. We think of a river to be a habitat for wildlife, and we also think of a river to be a place where people can recreate, right? Where people can enjoy this big body that serves multiple functions just in being a river, right? And so if you get to see the LA River from Glendale, past Glendale, right, where you hit all the industries in Vernon and Commerce, you can see that it doesn't look like a river, right, Laura?
No,
you
it
got
looked
to
like
see
a concrete strip with a little something in the middle that was hard to make out.
And so for people that live near that river, that side of the river, the lower part of the river, it's not a place that you want to be in, right? It's definitely not a place where you want to kayak in, right? Especially if you have the Exides near this river that are doing illegal dumping. And LA just came out with the master plan that it wants to build a river. It's $1 billion project. And in making things look pretty, we see a trend in LA that when things start looking better, our communities get pushed out, right? And so because we have this instinct of knowing when something isn't going right, when we heard of the LA River plan, we knew that immediately would call attention to gentrifiers, right, or developers. And so when the plan rolled out and they planned out a list of organizations that needed to be at the table, East Yard was not at the table, right? But you had people in that room saying that East Yard has to be on the table, especially when it comes to the lower LA River. And it was through those networks, it was through that work that we are now part of the master plan and leading the lower LA River plan. But community members have had events around this river, like the Reclaiming the LA River, that's what one of the events were. And we would have like a guerrilla event where we would just bike ride along the river and we would show pictures of the river, right? We would have visuals for people to imagine what this river could look like, right? And so this is a way that we, one, shift power around who has access to planning the process, but then we also shift power in sometimes their own agendas around the plan. And for example, one of the things that they failed to ignore is the lead, right? The sediments, right? Through our research at East Yard that was led by community, we were able to show that there's lead in the river. And that was one of the things that they left out. But it's when you work with community that you're able to see that things are a lot uglier than it seems, right?
Maybe you could get it called something other than a master plan, which kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies anyway.
Mistress plan?
Well, it's a group plan. Maybe it's an inclusive plan.
A plan.
Is Frank Gehry the master?
I don't know who's the master. Is he not the master? Jody says he's not the master. But even if he was the head of it, it'd be more a feminine plan, feminist plan. He's a good guy.
So can you see this kind of work? Can you see how this kind of work can happen? Literally, people said East Yard has to be at the meeting, and it made a difference. Maybe we want to do more of that.
Yeah, and we also need to address that as of right now, the LA River is not really accessible to people. People don't really know that there's a river, right? Because when they look at it, it looks far from anything that looks like a river. And so when you're able to put community members in those meetings, they're able to inform the process. But that also puts a lot of responsibility on those leading agencies, on those leading individuals to be accountable to those ideas, right? I think, for example, when we host events around the plan, people have mentioned how cool would it be to have a place where Indigenous people could practice their ceremonies, right? Or using fire, even, because fire is very sacred for Indigenous people. And so what could that look like? Right, where a place that Indigenous people could have sanctuary in the LA River, or where people of color could get to this place, but it's accessible, and it also comes with rent control policies, right? And so we're working on a community stability toolkit, right, to show our local councils that these are the things that we need to do to ensure that community members will enjoy the projects that will serve them and benefit them.
Jane,
Cool.
let's go to next steps for this group specifically, and then next steps for you. You're going to be traveling around the country, and as soon as shooting is over. Where does Fire Drill Fridays go from here? I heard Wilmington, I heard Bakersfield.
Well, as long as I'm here, we're going to do it the first Friday of every month in different parts of California. And I already said you can text Jane to 877-877 in order to find out where it's going to be if you want to join. And it's our new website. And, you know, we need bodies. We need a lot of bodies. We had a really good turnout for the first one on, yeah.
At City Council, City Hall.
Yeah, it was really good. Norman Lear, how old is he? 97, and he showed up, and we went together to watch. Well, anyway, I won't go into that. But yeah, we need bodies. And then as soon as Grace and Frankie is over, we're going to go out on the road on a national tour to build local Fire Drill Fridays and get out the climate vote.
You were going to say, I know that we do need a whole nother gathering to talk about gender in relation to all of this, but you touched on it. Do you want to say anything about what difference gender makes to this work and why we see so many women in leadership of it?
Well, it's long, but I mean, I think older women. I mean, what the hell do we have to lose, right? You know, I don't know about you all, but I'm through with men who are scared of strong women, and I think there's a lot of older women who are, you know, we're ready to put our bodies on the line. Now, it helps to have white privilege and to be famous. I understand absolutely why there were very few African Americans that risked arrest with us. Doesn't mean they're not brave. It means that they have a whole different history with law enforcement, and the Capitol Police weren't always so, you know, kind to protesters. That came from a lot of movement lawyering that made that happen. But there's a role for everyone, and if you are privileged and white, we've got to put our bodies on the line. Just like it's important for the United States to lead the way on climate, because not all countries have the wherewithal, the technology, and the wealth that we have. So we have to lead the way. What was your question?
That was it, pretty much.
Okay. You know, we're wise, we're old, we have nothing to lose, and we have a different kind of, I think, relationship to the earth. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Yale scientist Anthony Leserowitz. He's a human geographer, and he studies the human relationship to the climate crisis. It's fascinating studies that he does. But what he has shown through extensive research is that older women care more about the environment than men do, but they're less versed in the science of it. And you know, there's all kinds of reasons. You know, it's the STEM, gender issues. We don't feel that we can grasp science as well. I don't know what it is. I know that I never felt capable until I read about Greta, and I thought, well, if this 15-year-old Swedish student with Asperger's can pay attention to science, then I can, and whoa, it makes a difference. So we do have to pay attention to the science and what the science is telling us. And so that's, women have to do that. But also, we are the first victims of the climate crises. Most climate refugees are women. We are the last to be rescued. We are the ones that help heal the communities and keep people together. But even because we have more body fat, we hold more carbon in our bodies than men do, and it can affect the children in utero and through breast milk. So there's all kinds of ways in which women are the first to bear the brunt of the climate crisis, and we're also on the front lines of the solutions to the climate crisis. But always, I mean, even on the last day, well, when I turned 82, my best birthday party ever, there were 143 of us arrested. You were one of them. And what, I think we outnumbered men 5 to 1?
Easily.
Yeah. And the
A
men
good
were
time
silent.
was had by all.
The men were kind of like silent, and the women, we were running all over and organizing. Jody was there too, talking to each other and organizing. And
We're trying to organize to have them not use plastic handcuffs because we're against plastics. It's a challenge. We were asking for recyclable. Should we take some questions?
yeah, let's do it.
Let's take some questions. Ushers, everybody, please. Now, we have a definition of a question. It has a question mark at the end. So we're going to try to enforce that fairly sternly. I want to see 4 people prepared. So you want to hand over 1? That's 1. Yep. So you've got that mic, and then I'm going to tell you where to go next. So while you've got that one, when she's finished, I want you to go up here to the aisle. This one over here in the blue. Got it? And then we take one on this side in between. Okay, over here, on the far right-hand side.
Let's let her talk in the
Yeah, we will. Well, okay, 1, 2. So we go 1, 2, 3. Okay, go.
First of all, thank you for all being here, and I'm sorry, Janet, for what happened to your father. I'm an immigrant. It took me 23 years to become a citizen, so I know what it takes. I wanted to ask if water is going to be one of the topics for Fire Drill Fridays. I know right now, for instance, they're trying to build a desalination plant of Huntington Beach. It will raise water rates 2 or 3 times, and people might lose their home over a water bill. It will basically destroy the beach there. And water is a huge issue here in California. Trump just visited the Central Valley. He's going to bring more water to the Central Valley to frack. And right now we're irrigating our food crops with oil wastewater, including organic crops. So I would love to bring this issue to the forefront because water is life. Thank you.
So first question is water. We'll hold it.
Winnie Mahoney, yes.
Let's take this question. Yep.
My question is, I lived in downtown LA. I love what you guys are doing. I'm going to come on the bus. My question to the heart of the matter is, are any men capable of helping you, like Michael Bloomberg or Bernie Sanders, or is that too loaded of a question?
Oh, can Bernie or Bloomberg help? And the third question, then we'll get answers.
Hi there. Thanks to all of you for the work that you're doing and for coming to share that with us today. No doubt you are having an impact with your efforts. And Ms. Fonda, I want to ask you specifically, what change have you seen affected with the Fire Drill Fridays so far?
All right, so we have 3 questions. What change have you seen so far effective, not just to you? What are you doing around water? And then this question of, is there a role for men, and do you have an expectation of some particular men like Bernie Sanders or Michael Bloomberg? Take in any order you like. Janet.
I will speak to the water one. Yeah, I mean, water is sacred. Water is life. The work that we're doing in our communities is around H2Rs, and that project is to see what leading our own studies. So it's important to focus on the science, but it's also important that when community members, bring their stories and bring their concerns, is that we also listen and we also validate that as well. And so the work that we're doing is partnering up with universities and professors that are from our communities that can lead the work around testing our water, and then pushing for our local representatives to because it's really hard. I mean, water is so complex. It's really a scary thing to talk about in California. But at least locally, we're able to identify, we know what's in our air, we know what's in our soil, and community members now want to know what's in our water. So we're in the initial phases of making assessments, whether it's through our parks or schools and in our homes.
I just want to add, yes, water was one of our Fire Drill Fridays, and one of the leading water experts in the world spoke there. Her name is Maud Barlow. She is from Canada. I urge you all to read her book, her latest book. It's a small book. It's called Whose Water Is It Anyway? She says we have to fight tooth and nail against the privatization of water. We cannot allow people to bottle up and sell us water. It's our public right. And city, by state, by country, her campaign is creating blue zones where people are taking, Baltimore, for example, people rose up, they were trying to charge them for their water, and they rose up and they now control their water. So it's got to become a public entity, and we can make it happen in Los Angeles. Whose water is it anyway? It's a quick read.
One other thing to add is that in addition to the Fire Drill Friday protest that you may have seen in your social media stream, every Thursday, the night before the protest and the civil disobedience, Jane hosted teach-ins on different topics, which are archived. So you could go and listen to the one that had Maud Barlow in it, or you could listen to the one that had some of Janet's colleagues from Texas on it. And that's all there on different topics. And the topics ranged, if I remember, from water to jobs to women to war. And that was the next question I was going to get to, but I want to make sure you get a chance to answer the
Can I answer this
B-men question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course there are men who are helping us. Women aren't morally better than men. We just don't have our masculinity to prove, which gives us much more free time. That's actually a Gloria Steinem quote. No, yes, there are men, but it doesn't matter whether they do or not. It's up to us to demand it. That's why we have to build an army and be in the streets and force it to happen. The scientists are telling us the only way this is going to work is for people to be mobilized. We have to be ready to fill the streets. And this Earth Day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, at least from what I know, it's going to be some of the largest climate demonstrations in the history of this country. And no, we're not asking any politicians to. We're not having anything to do with any politicians at all. That said, if Governor Newsom says, yes, I'm closing down all, we're not doing any new fossil fuel drilling and we're closing down everything within 2,500 feet of homes and communities, we would invite him to speak. Yes, we would.
But I'm sure this isn't going to be the only person in the room wondering how you're engaging or thinking about this election campaign. I'm sure that there's a question lingering around the election campaign.
Well, go
Are you
on to the
backing
Greenpeace website and see there they have a candidate scorecard and see how the candidates are scored in terms of the climate. Now, there was a question about, do I think that the Fire Drill Fridays have had an impact? Well, I think that when 12,000 people go to Jane at 877-877 and say, we want to start one where I live, I think that that's good. See, the young people have Fridays for Future and Sunrise Movement, and the millennials have Extinction Rebellion, and so us old folks, we needed something that we could do every week to put our bodies on the line, and people want it. They want it. So yes, I think so. We weren't really aiming at the government. We're aiming at building an army. That's what the climate scientists, the climate senators, the climate task force senators said. You're building an army, make it big. We need that pressure. So that's what we have to do. We have, between now and November, everybody has to be ready to do something to force our politicians, whoever gets elected. You know what I mean?
So I
and
heard
if you know who, I can't even dare to say it. If the worst happens, we have to close the government down. Right, Janet, you'll be there.
Janet will be there.
Shutting it
front
down
line.
right behind you.
Alongside.
The word army was used again. So let's talk about war. And where is stopping war the number one source of our environmental pollution in the world in your agenda?
One of the great things that I learned in Washington, D.C. during the Fire Drill Fridays, we devoted one to war in the military. I learned it from Jody Evans and Phyllis Bennis of Code Pink. The anti-war movement and the climate movement have to be one. We have to move as one. The Pentagon is the biggest user of fossil fuels. For everybody here, 40 years and younger, every war that's ever been fought since you've been born has been about oil. So that's why we have to shut down fossil fuels and stop war, and they go together.
We'll take 3 more questions. That's fine. There's
Get a guy.
And what about somebody from East Yard? Cindy, somebody from East Yard want to speak up?
There's a man back there.
Okay. We're doing affirmative action for the man. All right, here we go. One.
Yeah, no,
and I
it's-
meant you before, so we're going to come for you. And anyone from East Yard?
He's got the white, yeah, him.
Okay, first
Hi.
you, and then I'm going to bug somebody down here. Go.
You spoke about putting pressure to shut down orphaned and idle drills. What can you suggest for each of us in the audience today to do when we get home tonight to put that pressure on?
Thank you. Good question about that. What about right here? Somebody from here. Come on now. Somebody from East Yard. Oh, fair enough. Let's go there. We'll grandmother you in.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Hi, I am a grandmother. So my question is, and it's something that you both spoke to on the panel, and that is this idea of building a mass movement, right? And so I still see that there's like this division between the white kind of, I'll call it white environmental movement, and then the movements that are happening in communities of color, such as East Yard and other movements, you know, which I'm a part of as well. So I guess what I'm wondering about is how do we bring the people together, right? The poor, disenfranchised, and marginalized communities, along with more middle class and more privileged communities, to work together, because I totally agree we need to build this mass movement. But I'm wondering, how do we do this?
Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I do.
I thought you might.
Did you want me to
Give
say
us
what
one.
they are? Okay, well, one of them is that we need to get on the table together and talk to each other. Because right now we work in like different silos and we're not communicating with each other. And that's really what I'd like to know is how do we get to talking to each other so that we can work together? We only have the one planet, right?
Okay. Perfect. So one more question right there, and then we'll get answers for these 3.
Thank you so much. My question is, Jane, since you mentioned Germany, the Grüne, the Green Party, I was very much involved in Chicago. And my question is any hope that the Green Party can take off? We have in Brazil, in Germany, Mexico, and other countries, is there any, how can we do for another party, especially the Green Party, to take off?
Okay.
And the other question, please, how can we pressure the local politicians so they don't take us for granted? Yes, we are Democrats, but don't take us for granted. What can we do?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have, how do we actually shut down the drilling that's happening right here, the active drilling right now?
Well, I think it was what could we do when we go home tonight right
yes.
away?
And then how do we bring...
I would say, have you gotten your ballot? Yeah. I would really study that ballot. I would talk to other people to see who are the real people that will really do good, and pay close attention to how to vote, and then talk to all of your colleagues, your family, your friends, your neighbors about, try to influence how they're going to vote, given what you will start studying tonight very carefully. And you know, you can go, as I said, in terms of presidential candidates, go on the Greenpeace website and see the scorecards for candidates. I think right now voting is really, really critical. And then when there's a call to mass action, like there will be on Earth Day, be ready to, you know, to come out. And also, you know, if you know people who will have a hard time getting to the polls, help them get to the polls, drive them, whatever. We have to, every single vote counts like it has never counted before. So that's the thing to do tonight.
And I heard at an event yesterday, it's very important if you are a non-party preferred voter that you ask for a crossover ballot. And you are ostensibly allowed to register as a Democrat. You can't do this on the Republican side, but same day at the polling station. Important things to do.
The last thing that I will also add to that, I think it's really important that as we look at the Greenpeace websites and we look at the news, where we get our information, it's good to look for alternative media, right? So looking at your local organizations and see what they really are saying about those politicians, what they really are saying about those policies, and we need to start validating, right, validating those sources, right? That sometimes, the news is one thing, but we need to really look at independent media, right? Local media as another outlet for our information.
What about this question about bringing the relationship, improving the collaboration, or however we want to talk about it? How do we avoid the siloing of our movements and the breakdown along racial lines? Both of you.
Well, I'll start. One of the things that I'm the proudest about with Fire Drill Fridays is, as you might have seen, for those of you who came last Friday to the Fire Drill Friday in front of City Hall, there were celebrities there, including Joaquin Phoenix. Did he speak? No. He did at the Oscars, but no, he didn't at Fire Drill Fridays. He introduced a young woman from Wilmington who has been diagnosed with cancer because she lives under a refinery. All the celebrities, and they were all white, introduced people from the frontline communities to tell their stories. Every single Fire Drill Friday, every week in DC, if you looked at the stage, it was a minority white people. They were all indigenous people, Latinos, African Americans. They were all people from frontline communities whose stories people had not heard. And that's the point, is for people like me to use our celebrity to allow those voices that haven't been heard to reach a broader audience. And I tell you, my mind was blown by the stories that I heard, and that's why I'm writing a book that will come out in July about those Fire Drill Fridays, and it will contain those stories. So, I mean, here, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, last year, no, I don't know, it could have been... It could have been me and a white guy with Laura. Well, you were more advanced than me.
It wouldn't have been you and a white guy if I was here.
Yeah, that's right. But, we both insisted that we have a frontline voice from a community that's directly impacted, and that's why Janet is here, and that's the efforts that we have to make sure that these voices are heard, because we're not going to solve the problem unless these voices are heard, because she's right. I totally now know that she's right. It's the communities that know what the solutions are, because they live it every day, and if we don't listen to them, we're not going to come up with solutions that work.
Yeah, and I also want to add, for those allies in the room, right, for those folks that are looking to step up or, pull up, how Rihanna said, we're known for keeping receipts, right? We're making sure that you're being consistent as an ally. We know, we're talking about you, right? Where every time we pull in a new ally, we need to see, if you're credible, right? If you're really down for the movement, if you're really down to support our cause. And so I think that it's really important that when you commit to that work, right, just how Laura has and in the way that Jane has, right, that they're consistent with that work, that they're consistent with their solidarity, right? And so as you work with communities, right, keep your promise, right? If you say, yes, I'll put you in contact with that person, yes, I will shoot you an email, keep your promise, because we're keeping receipts, and we're very about pulling them up when we have to.
So I think with that, we'll close, unless you have a closing line. But on the point of receipts, I'm sure East Yard also takes contributions. But if you are going places where organizations that aren't in the room need to be in the room, many of you have the power to make that introduction, to say, I'm bringing somebody along with me. Jane has modeled, each one bring one. In her case, it's each one bring 300 or a few thousand. But I think that's the message here, is how do we do environmental justice allyship effectively, not to do anybody any favors, but to actually preserve human life on this planet and to make our society not just saved from the brink, but better. all around.
I want to add one thing. Something else that I noticed during the months in Washington with Fire Drill Fridays, as I looked out over the crowd that got bigger and bigger every week, it was becoming a community. And I think that a lot of the reasons that people kept coming is we need community. You know, one of the great things about being older like I am is I remember pre-Reaganism. When things were culturally different. Starting in the 80s with Reaganism, and across the pond it was Thatcherism, the notion of the commons, the notion of the collective, of the public sphere, began to be deliberately eroded, and the cult of individualism began to rise. Individualism is a tool of the ruling class. It serves their purpose and their needs. When we get together, we become dangerous. Individually, we can. That's why the fossil fuel industry is encouraging people to, drive electric and recycle and all this. They want us to focus on our little individual things, and those are good because they make us feel good. But that's not how we change power. Building community, getting a sense of us as part of we need that, and that is growing. I mean, the one thing that's happened in the last 4 years is people with a conscience, people with a sense of what a democracy should be like and what is right and what is wrong are starting to be willing to stand up and fight for it. And now's the time, right? I mean, we have to stick together. We have to have each other's backs. We have to sense ourselves as part of a community and grow it. Each of you, grow it as big as we can. We're going to need each other in the coming time. It's going to be so important. Thank you.